Hello guys, you're welcome to Lizama Stitches. My name is Amaka. So in this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make corsets. But if you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I upload new videos. So let's get started. So I have my dartless basic bodice pattern here. So I'm going to briefly explain to you what I did here. Now this is my neckline. The neck width is 3 inches and the neck depth is 3 inches. And this is my shoulder line. I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant. And this is my armhole. This is my armhole curve. So this is my chest point. Now let me label these lines. This is my chest point. This is my bust point. This is my under bust point. And this is my waist point. So I'm going to input my dart. For me to do that, I'll be working with my nipple to nipple measurement. Now my nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches. So I'm going to mark 4 inches here on this line and on this line. And I'll connect it. I'll connect it with a straight line. Now this is my bust point and this is my under bust point. Now I'm going to find the distance between my bust point and my under bust point. Now the distance between my bust point and my under bust point is 3 inches. Now for me to impute my bust radius, I'm going to be working with this measurement, 3 inches. Now I'm going to rotate this 3 inches just like this. I'll rotate it. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to mark 3 inches. From this point, I'm going to mark 3 inches. That is from this point. So now this is my bust radius. Now the next thing I'm going to do, now on this point, on my chest point, I'm going to come down by ½ inch. Now on this point, this ½ inch mark that I gave here, I'm going to go in by ½ inch and I'll mark ½ inch. So now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to connect this point to this point with my curved ruler. Now on this point, I'm going to mark 1 inch. And I'm going to, now from this point, I'm going to come down by ½ inch. And I'll extend this point to this point. Our bust is fuller on this part. That's why I marked 1 inch here. But if the person's bust is small, you can either use 3/4 inch or ½ inch. But I used 1 inch. Now I'm going to connect this point to this point with my curved ruler, just like this. So now I'm going to extend this line. I want to impute my dart, but for me to do that, I'm going to extend this line. Let me extend this line a little. So now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to connect this point to this point with my curved ruler, just like this. And I'll connect this point to this point, just like this. Now, if you don't want your corset to be too revealing, you can go up by either ½ inch Or if you want it to come down, if you want to show a little bit of flesh, you can come down by half inch. But I'm maintaining this line for the sake of this tutorial. I'm maintaining this line. I'm going to impute my dart. On my waist point, I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides of this line. So I'm going to mark 1 inch here and 1 inch here. Now on this point, on my underbust point, I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides of this line. So I'm going to mark 1 inch here and 1 inch here. Now, so I'm going to connect the points. I'm going to connect this point to this point with a straight line. And I'll connect this point to this point with a straight line. Now for this one, I'm going to connect this point to this point, just like this. Now because I don't want pointy edges, that's why I'm doing this, just like this. And I'll connect this point. Now on this point, I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides of this line. I'll mark 1 inch here and 1 inch here. So I'll connect this point to this point and this point to this point with my curved ruler. So I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. Now the bust circumference I'm working with is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 9.5 inches here. So this is 9.5 inches. Plus these 2 inches that which I'm going to cut off from here, I'm going to return it. So this is my 2 inches. 2 inches that plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. This is my 1.5 inches seam allowance. So I'm going to take the same measurement here on the bust point. The bust measurement, the bust circumference is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. And this is 9.5. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. This is 1.5 inches seam allowance. Now on my underbust point, I'm going to take my underbust measurement on my underbust point. The underbust circumference I'm working with is 30 inches. 30 divided by 4 gives you 7.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 7.5 inches here. 7.5 inches. Now these 2 inches that which I'm going to cut off, I'm going to return it here. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance puts you here. So on the waist point, I'm going to take the waist measurement on the waist point. Now the waist circumference I'm working with is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. So I'm going to mark 8 inches here. Plus these 2 inches that which I'm going to cut off, I'm going to return it here. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. So I'm going to connect this point. So now that's just it with the front panel. So I'm going to cut it. So now I'm going to label these. I'm going to label my pattern paper. You know, this corset can be confusing sometimes. If you don't label it, you get confused. So I'm going to label this. This is going to be 1, and this is 2. Now this one is going to be on fold. When I'm cutting this, I'm going to cut it on fold. So let me write it down so that I won't forget. Now I'm going to cut one of these. I'm going to cut this unfold, and I'm going to cut two of these. I'm going to cut two of this, and I'll cut two of this. Now this one is going to be, this is going to be on my left hand side, and this is going to be on my right hand side, so that I don't get confused. Sorry guys. Now here I have 1 inch seam allowance here. I have 1 inch hemming allowance here. So I didn't know my camera wasn't on, and I was talking. But thank God I saw it on time. I noticed it on time. So I'm removing this. I have 1 inch hemming allowance here. Now while cutting my fabric, I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance here. And on this one, I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance all around it. On this one, I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance all around it. On this one, I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance here, here, and here. Now here, I already have my seam allowance here. I have 1.5 inches seam allowance here, while I have 1 inch hemming allowance here. So let me cut the back. I'm going to keep this aside and work on the back panel. For the back panel, my neck width is 3 inches, the neck depth is 1 inch. And I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant, which I connected to the neckline. Now this is my armhole curve. So the next thing I'm going to do now, I'm going to impute my dart. For me to do that, I'll be working with my nipple to nipple measurement. Now the nipple to nipple measurement I'm working with is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches. So I'm going to mark 4 inches here. 4 inches, and I'll mark 4 inches here. And I'll connect it. Now take note, every measurement I'm taking it from this line. Now this is my zipper allowance. This is my zipper allowance. So every measurement I'm taking it from this line. So the next thing I'm going to do, now this is my waist point. This is my waist point, and this is my chest point. From my chest point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. And on this point, I'm going to mark ½ inch on both sides of this line. So I'm going to mark ½ inch here and ½ inch here. So I'm going to connect this point to this point and this point to this point. Now to eliminate the zipper bulge, I'm going to mark 1 inch. I'm going to mark 1 inch here. One inch, and I'm going to connect this 1 inch to this point. And so I'm going to create a new zipper allowance. So from this point, I'm going to mark 1 inch. And I'm going to connect this point to this point. So I have a new zipper allowance. So right now, this part is no longer useful to me. So I have a new zipper allowance. This is my new zipper allowance. I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. The bust circumference I'm working with. Now the bust circumference I'm working with is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 9.5 inches here. So this is my 9.5 inches plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. Now on the waist point, I'm going to take my waist measurement on the waist point. Now the waist circumference I'm working with is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. So I'm going to mark 8 inches here. Now 8 inches here. Now plus this 1 inch for that. The 1 inch I'm going to cut off from here. I'm going to return it here. Now this 1 inch I'm going to remove from here. I'm going to return it here. This 1 inch I'm cutting off from here. I'm returning it here. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. So I'm going to connect it. I'm going to connect this point to this point. Now I'm going to, now 1 inch, I'm going to use 1 inch hemming allowance. And I'll connect it. You remember that on this point, I came down by ½ inch. On the front panel, I came down by ½ inch. So I'm going to repeat the same thing here. I'm going to come down by ½ inch. And I'll extend it. Now from this point, I'm going to come down by 2 inches. And I'll connect this point to this point. So I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to remove this dart. So this is the back panel. Now this is the back panel. Now this is my corset pattern. Now this is the front panel and this is the back panel. So with this, I'm going to cut my fabric. I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance here, here, and ½ inch seam allowance here and here, and I'll add here also, here. I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance all around this, all around this. Now on this part, now this is the back panel. I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance here and here. I'm going to add ½ inch seam allowance here and here. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to transfer this. I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. I'm going to use this to cut my fabric. I'm going to use it to cut the main fabric and the lining. So I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. Now I've cut my fabric. Now I have the main fabric. I have the main fabric and the lining here. Now this is the main fabric and this is the lining. So the same way I cut the main fabric, that's how I cut the lining. So now this is what I'm going to do. Now you see that I have ½ inch seam allowance here and here. On this I have ½ inch seam allowance all around it. Here I have ½ inch seam allowance here, here, and here. I also have here. So now this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to separate the pattern paper from the fabric so that I'll show you how to join it. Now remember to notch, especially here, this one. Don't forget to notch this one so that you don't make mistake when you're joining it. So I've notched it. Don't forget to notch. So I'm going to place this on this and I'm going to sew it this way with ½ inch seam allowance. I'll sew it with ½ inch seam allowance. Now for this one, now this was cut on fold. So I'm going to place this. So for this, I'm going to place this and this way, and I'll sew this with ½ inch seam allowance, and I'll sew this with ½ inch seam allowance. So that's it with the front panel. So now for the back panel, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to place this and this together just like this, and I'm going to sew it with ½ inch seam allowance. I'll sew this with ½ inch seam allowance, and I'm going to do the same thing on this one. I'm going to place the two together. I'm going to place the two together just like this and sew it with ½ inch seam allowance. So I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. Now take note, I've already ironed interfacing on my fabric. So now this is my front panel and this is the back panel. So the next thing I'm going to do is this. I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to join it this way. I'm going to sew this way. and I'll join this, I'll place this way, and I'll sew it. So after sewing it that way, so this is my cup. So this is my cup. Now this is how I'm going to sew my cup. I'm going to place my cup. Now you see how this cup is. So this is my cup. After I've joined it and I ironed it with my hemming. I ironed it with my tailor's ham. Now, so I'm going to place it. Now this part, this joining here, I'm going to hold here and I'll hold here, and I'll sew it this way. This is how I'm going to sew it. I'll sew it to this point, and from here I'll sew this one to this point. I'm also going to sew my boning casing. Now this is my bias. I'm going to use bias tape for that. I'm going to sew it here. I'll sew on the tip, and I'll sew one at the middle, at the center front. I'll sew in one here, and I'll also sew here. I'll add one here. Now for the second back panel, I'm going to add one here. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to sew my casing. So I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. Now the same way I'm going to join the main fabric, that's how I'm going to join the lining. So I'll do it and show you the outcome. So this is the right side. I've sewn the casing. After sewing my casing, now this is how to properly fix in your boning. You see my boning. Now I've cut out this for this. I left some allowance. Now when I sew in this, I'm going to have allowance here. So I'm going to So for this one, I'm going to fix in this. And for this, I'm going to fix in this, just like this. So now after fixing in my boning, now this is my lining. I'm going to place my lining on my main fabric, right side fitting right side. And I'm going to hold this part, and I'm going to sew it to this point, and I'll sew this part to this point, and I'll sew it this way, sew it down. Then I'll sew from here to here to here. I'm going to leave some allowance here. Which I'm going to use to turn this to the right side. After turning it to the right side, I'm now going to tidy up this place. I'm going to tidy up this part. I'll do it in such a way that I'll do it neatly with my needle and thread. That's what I'm going to use to do it. So I'm going to do it and show you the outcome. So I'm done sewing. Now this is my corset. So this is the right side, and you see how it is. So this is the right side, and this is the wrong side. So that's just it with this tutorial. If you found this tutorial helpful, please click on the like button. Share this video with your friends. Share this video in your sewing groups. Subscribe to my channel. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Lizama Stitches. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.